Because it's amazing the just making the handlebar can be 20 to 30 watts. We still get these guys, oh yeah, but this is a special, it's made for me in Germany, and which is nuts. I mean, we're first 150 grams, like, I don't care. Yeah, you can find huge differences. But funny enough, and we knew this in the 70s.
They're actually manipulating the rider's position on the bike and forcing them into a...
We had this secret, and then we kind of lost it. I think the hard thing with the saddle is just there are absolutely gains to be found there, but solving that.
Josh, welcome back to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We've seen a trend on particularly road racing, less so on gravel, of pros, and I almost think it's like age restricted. If you're under 30 years of age, you get to ride with your hoods pointed in. If you're over 30 years of age, you ride with your hoods straight. Yeah. What's the deal with this? Is there an aero advantage to this?
Yeah, yes and no, and that's we've actually worked a lot with a number of athletes. I mean, particularly we've done a ton of work with EF guys this year, and not in any way going to take credit for the success that the team's had this year, but I mean, that team has gotten insanely focused on aero and efficiency. And we've been helping them with that. The thing with the turned in hoods is they allow for a much more efficient rider body position, in that we can just bring the rider's hands in, and then it kind of forces them to keep their elbows in, because they, as I teach it, you want your hands here, and then you want to feel the handlebar in your forearm, because it would be easy to put your hands there and then let your elbows stick out, right? Which would undo a huge part of the gain. I think the movement we're going to see from a product standpoint is we're going to start to see more bars that, have, say, like a 34, 35 millimeter kind of a top and hood section with a little bit more of a flare, that you get a slightly better sprinting position. So maybe 35 centimeters, at the hoods, and 42 centimeters or 44 centimeters at the drops, so that you can have that sort of better control when you're sprinting, but also have that really narrow upper body position. I think the other thing that it's harder to see in the footage, but the bikes they're just getting longer. And so I think we've been so focused in the old days on pros being long and low, but in a lot of cases you don't necessarily need the low if you can hit the long and the narrow. And so some of the road bike wind tunnel testing, I mean, we've done, I've seen, we can make some changes up there and pretty quickly find 30 watts of savings at 45K an hour.
Have you seen the Aero Coach Ornex handlebars? They're purported to be 21 watts faster than a round bar, and I think that testing's at like 45 kilometers an hour. Now, it's their own data, so again, I'm not sure what we read into that.
Is it just an Aero flat, like the flat top of the bar is Aero shaped, or? No,
it's actually almost mimicking the position that you would turn your hoods in. So it's quite a funky design. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll take a look at it. Yeah. I mean, because it's amazing the just making the handlebar of an Aero cross section can be 20 to 30 watts, which is nuts. I mean, we were first discovering that 20 years ago when we were playing with the very first carbon handlebars, and you're like, oh wow, you come out of school and that round is bad, right? Cylinders are just terrible aerodynamically, but then you actually make the top of a handlebar into a wing, and I mean, doesn't have to be that good of a wing. You don't have to be all that smart. You didn't even have to try that hard, and it's 20 watts on the bike. So, that is, one of the things we tell our athletes. I mean, you should never, ever, ever be riding a round handlebar. I mean, it just, it is the worst of all the possibilities, right? It's more pressure on your hands. It's less vertical deflection for comfort. And it's significantly less aero. And so, we still get these guys, oh yeah, but this is a special, it's made for me in Germany and it's 150 grams. Like, I don't care. It's back to like weight will matter for 2% of, whatever event you're in. And if you're a World Tour pro, we're already adding weight to your bike. So
Yeah.
stop getting hung up on taking 10 grams out of this part that just makes some poor mechanic have to put 10 more grams back in somewhere. And yeah, you can find huge differences with Aero shapes up front, and then also, I mean, just getting narrow. And funny enough, I mean, we knew this in the 70s, right? I mean, the guys I grew up kind of being mentored by, they were all racing like 35 and 38 centimeter bars. It was really only, I think, in the 90s that bars started to get wide. Again, so it was kind of like we had this secret, and then we kind of lost it, and now we're finding it again.
On the saddles, is there a gain to be made there? I seen a gain sticking with Aero Coach just because I had a good look around their website before it. They have one called the Axis saddle, which there again, internal testing is claiming to be 3 to 4 watts faster than the next fastest saddle.
I think the hard thing with the saddle is just that you have to sit on it, right? So there are absolutely gains to be found there, aerodynamically and otherwise. And I know, what is it? Tune makes like the speed needle. And I know that there's a number of companies that have done some interesting work with like, running an Aero post right into the saddle, and there's no rails, and you're trying to clean up all the air under there. And one of the big problems with a lot of those products historically has just been like, you take away the sort of like hammock suspension from the saddle, and then it's miserable to ride. And so, maybe it's good for a time trial or whatever, but, particularly at the Pro Tour level, it's like, even if it is 3 watts, can I sit on it for 5 hours? So that one's a little bit harder for me. There's also have been, and I don't know this particular saddle, but there have been saddles over the years. I know when Physique originally did the Arione saddle, they claim that the wing flex added watts by not disrupting the rider's, inner thigh motion or something. And, there were these claims. It was like, it's 20 watts faster. And, you can really instantly just go and debunk a lot of that stuff. That, there's not 20 watts lost to inner thigh rubbing on a saddle. So I don't know this particular product, but yeah, I mean, there's absolutely aero gains to be found everywhere still on the bicycle. And then some areas are just harder than others with the fact that, is it comfortable?
What's an interesting trend with some of the innovation is the recognition that position makes up so many of the gains that we can get, like physically how we hold ourselves, our posture on the bike. So a lot of the innovation, be that the saddle we've just talked about there, or the handlebars that are kind of forcing you into the tucked in hoods position, they're actually manipulating the rider's position on the bike and forcing them into a more aerodynamic position. Is there other parts that we think you can, when you look at someone in the wind tunnel and you manipulate their position, you move everything around, and you're like, okay, here's the Pareto principle, here's the 4 or 5 things that we know work every time. Is there other areas on the bike that you see that technology adapting to force riders into certain postural changes?
Oh, I think there's a lot further you could go. I mean, I was at a tunnel test in probably 02 with Trek and Lance, and when that whole circus was happening, and they put him on a bike with a God, I think like a 45 or 48 millimeter wide bottom bracket and a single chain ring, and I mean, just the boom, it's like 12, 15 watts right there just by like narrowing the Q factor up by by 20 millimeters. Things like that are still out there as possibilities. They just have these offsetting consequences, right? We narrow up your bottom bracket and your Q factor and all that. And now we're really limiting like how wide a tire you can run, and you've got to run single chain ring, and, you start to get into these other areas. So yeah, I think the stuff that's happening, and if the UCI would just back off of some of their rules, I think you might see it go even a little bit further. I think we would probably see the bikes steepen and lengthen a little bit if the rules changed, right? You have some of these things with the nose of the saddle relative to the bottom bracket. You can solve that with a shorter saddle, but you can really only go so far with it. So there's definitely stuff that's still there. And then I think a lot of it too is just training the riders for the feel, and giving them reference points and things to think about. There's tons of riders we work with, you try to come up with little, like I said, the thing of, horizontal forearms are faster, right? And so, with the turned in hoods, that's one of the things of like, hey, you don't just ride in the turned in hoods. You need to have your forearms horizontal. And the way to do that is we'll set it up in a way that like you're touching, like you're not resting on it because that's not comfortable, but you should feel it touch. That means your position is good. And so you can certainly train riders into certain like spatial reference points with things like that. Back when Aero helmets were much longer, we would, it's a little bit mean, but we'd do a thing where you'd put like a toothpick in the tail of the helmet in the foam sticking out. And then you'd tell the rider, like, you need to feel it poking you in the back. If it's not poking you in the back, it's sticking up in the air, and that's slow. And so, you would, and then you get into funny things like, could we just like tape it down to the right? And of course that's not legal. But you think all the way back.
I remember
to,
making Velcro on the end of my old Giro helmet, and I had put Velcro onto my speed suit and Velcro onto the bottom of it, and if I could feel it peeling off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, and that's not exactly legal, but it sure is effective. And, but again, this isn't new, right? I think of, the Italians, Italian pursuit team, right? With the cable, we're just going to like, hold your chest to the bicycle with a cable to make sure that you're low. Some of this is stuff that we really are rediscovering, but it really does show. I mean, that the human on the bicycle is, 80% of the drag. So, we can find a ton of marginal gains around the spokes and the rim shapes and the tires and the tube shapes of the frame and the this and the that. But I mean, that's really all just playing within that 20%. The stuff we can do in the body with the clothing, with the helmet, and then how that ties in with the position. There's, for the vast majority of riders, there's still huge gains to be found there. And, you give me someone like I don't know, like Ben Healy or one of these guys who, he's doing everything as right as can possibly be. We could still probably go to the wind tunnel for a couple of hours and find another couple of watts of savings through some of these positional or position equipment interaction type things.
Just to finish up, Josh, is there anything you're working on over Silka at the moment that you're really excited about?
I mean, honestly, this chain stripper that by the time this airs will have launched. I mean, to me, that is the next frontier. It's the democratization of wax chain lube. That is everybody I've ever converted to wax chain lube is like a mad convert. Right. Like you said, people want to, everybody who converts to wax wants to talk to you endlessly about how amazing it is and how you should be doing it. And the thing that's keeping people from doing it is this huge pain in the ass cleaning and stripping of the chain at the front end of that process. And so by solving that in a very simple, fast fashion, I mean, we have spent, I think, a year and a half and a lot of money developing this stuff. But solving that really makes wax-based chain lube a possibility for anybody. I mean, you can literally drip the stuff on. We've got a 2-step cleaning process. You drip it on, let it sit for 10 minutes, do another drip to flush through, hose with water to kind of blow all of it. What it does is it lifts and encapsulates the grease so that it can be flushed out. And then the residue it leaves behind is actually a wax adhesion promoter to the metal.
Unbelievable.
And so with, traditional chain cleaning, what you're trying to do is like go from solvent to remove the residue of the prior solvent. And with this stuff, it's actually stuff that wants to stick to both wax and metal. And so you're actually going to get a slightly longer per application lifespan using it than not using it. And it saves you hours of time. So to me, I think that's, the next exciting frontier from a product perspective that's out there. And then, a lot of, and you'll we'll probably see some stuff at the tour this year. We've just got probably a dozen 3D printing projects that we're doing for different teams or riders. Some of which will be debuting at the tour this year. And that stuff is always fun. Personally, it's fun for me because I get to travel and wind tunnel and do, work with the athletes, and, really design stuff that nobody's ever done before, and then actually make it and see it come to life. And, that's a great experience. And so hopefully all those things work out and make it on the bikes, and hopefully we get some results.
Josh, I've loved this conversation. I could literally have you on the podcast every week to talk about this nerdy stuff. Thanks very much for joining me on the Roadman Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.